think that means we're live.
All right.
I can't really tell. We're definitely recording. There's stuff spinning. I have no idea what this looks like. All right, so we're live. We got to get the ceremonial opening in. All right, there we go. Cheers, gentlemen. We got Burr Williams today, along with Mike Montalvo, who has been recently renamed Millennial Mike.
I'm going to own up to that title, too, so I'm going to ask a lot of millennial questions.
Have all the fun you want. So we got Burr. He's our local nature expert. And I got to tell you this story. Something happened that only you would take this as a compliment. I was working in my yard, and I have an old capped water well on the other side with a big pad. And our local fox, which is one of the largest foxes I have ever seen. I've seen her out at night, and it's huge. And it's probably a male because I don't hear much, right? It's females that make most noise.
Yeah, the females are the ones that do the caterwauling in February and March. And,
okay.
And the males come a running.
They haven't scared the hell out of me in a while, but anyway, he always poops around there. That's his favorite spot. And I was hauling the lawnmower around there, and there's this pile of fox poop. And I just noted that there's a lot more hair in it than usual. So we're having a big mouse problem, the whole neighborhood.
Right. And
everybody's really, all the neighbors are talking about it. And I looked at that and I thought, you know what? I haven't had Burr on the podcast in a while. And so anybody else would freak out if I said,
shit makes
me. Yeah.
You think of
I saw a pile of fox poop and thought of you. So,
well, that's a conversation that actually occurs a lot because a lot of people see it and they go, "What in the heck is it?" But once you learn that, you learn what's around you, and that's one thing that's occurred since the advent of is so few people are out and about nowadays that all the birds and the animals and everything else have seemingly increased and become more dense in town just because there's not nearly as much activity as there used to be.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and I was going to tell you the scream. If you haven't heard a fox scream, it's somewhere between a bark and a screaming baby. Mm-hmm. And my studio back there has an evaporative cooler that's right above the desk back at the little sound area, and it's amazing because you can hear right through it. Like people on the sidewalk are talking, you can hear through all that stuff. And I was back there alone mixing something down, and it was quiet, about 2, 3 in the morning, and fox got right under that thing and started screaming.
And probably using the echo chamber of underneath the swamp cooler as a device.
The way the houses here are set up, certain dogs you can hear on both sides of the street because of the big house across from here, and one of them sounds like my dog. So I'll think she's onto something. She's caught a squirrel or whatever, and I'll go to see what's going on, and she's just laying there. She's in the house. It just sounds like another one.
It's real interesting how different animals and even birds are real aware of their what I would call a soundscape. Where I first sort of learned this, I was down in Big Bend, and I was sitting down near the waterfall downstream from the basin. Cattell Falls? No, it wasn't that one. It was the oak ones where the wind is. But there's sort of an area there that's overhung with a number of big trees, and the white-winged doves that were in those trees started playing with their echoes. They would make a sound, and then the echo would do something.
Oh, wow.
And then they would do it again, and it became like this freeform jazz, and it made me realize, hey, they know what the heck's going on here, and they're playing. you know, it's 2 or 3 in the afternoon and nothing's moving. It's 90 degrees and they're just sitting there jamming out.
That's one of the things I enjoy about hunting is just sitting back and listening to them. And I think it was the first time you and I ever communicated. Was I had a cowbird right over my blind, and I think there's a video somewhere with some. It sounded a lot like that one, but it's sort of a water gargling
Yeah.
sound and a few others, and you would hear one of them gurgle, and then
Slurpy, syrupy.
yeah. It reminded me of it's like a normal bird call, sort of a chirp, squawk, and then it evolves into this those water whistles that kids used to have. You know, you blow on it and it's got water and it bubbles. It sounds a lot like one of those.
Right.
I'm trying to get this to share, and it is just not working. Trying to put it out on you guys' pages, but this is confusing. All right.
Well, this is the first time you've tried to do it, isn't it?
It's the first time I've gone direct to Facebook, and I've had viewers come in and out, and then let's see, there's a few people.
Well,
There it goes.
I admire the heck out of you because you're trying all these new things, and I'm still stuck with the old single frame and no voice and no video.
Well, it's also I'm very gremlin prone. When I was playing with Tim when we were traveling pre-COVID days, I had the same rig set up the same way every time, do the same thing in here, and it's just we would come in here and sit down, and turn it on. Like when Sergey was here,
we had a lot of issues with that
complete mysteries. Like we have no idea why this has happened, and we have to run down all this technology in a lot of ways. And I've seen it as I've gotten older. I still like to experiment, but a lot of stuff I don't want to get into things that I've used. I don't really mess with anymore. We had a written blog, and they changed the software to an appearance, a very modernized type of thing. If you read Ken Morgan's blog, it was a lot like his. And I was looking at a new one, and these guys asked me to write for them. It was a police thing, and they just wanted me to be a contributor. And it was almost unreadable. Just the way it looked and the sequence and everything else. So, yeah, it was absolutely nuts. Mike, do you have access to your Facebook on your phone?
Yeah.
Would you see if this appears and try to share it?
Okay.
I really want to get it. I'd hope to get it to what's the really good Midland page? All Things Midland, Texas.
Well, there's
several.
that one, and there's Old Midland, which is Doug Hicks.
That's right, Doug's. Yeah.
I think All Things Midland might be Bill Bentley.
Yeah, that's Bill Bentley.
Yeah.
He's been in here before. In fact, we need to get him in here again.
Okay.
That guy has an incredible collection of photos and the like.
He does, man. That's inspiring. To
Did the All Things Midland?
yeah, you may have to be a member, but if you shoot it to yours and Burr's page too, it only gave me the option for one, and maybe shoot it toward the van cave.
Okay.
And Burr and I'll talk about something. So when I moved to this house, my wife and I married, and we may have talked about this, but we'll repeat it because not everybody's seen this. We bought this house and literally carried her over the threshold, and we've been here. We're coming from our 20th anniversary, and the house belonged to friends. One of my best friends and his family. Kids grew up here. I've still got their growth marks, inside the laundry room door and stuff like that. I can call him up and he can tell me right where sewer line's patched with a beer can. I'm not making that up. Not making that up at all. Anyway, it had the most beautiful St. Augustine grass. It had 5 or 6 trees in the front yards. Beautiful, beautiful place. And somebody my age, Gen X, your parents' house and your grandparents' house in the old part of town always had the St. Augustine. It was beautiful and perfect. And it was just a normal thing. I didn't think about xeriscaping. That's just what everybody did, and that was there. So my wife and I bought 2 pallets of St. Augustine, tilled the entire thing. I repaired and upgraded the old sprinkler
Right.
system. And I have a photo, and also it's on the Google Earth image. It was perfect. It looked like something out of a photograph.
A putting lawn.
Yeah, it was like a putting green. I can remember like there was a spot on the corner that wasn't getting water destroyed, and I'd go out there with a pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that happened was that disease went around that killed all of the honey locusts.
Mm-hmm.
So we lost 2 honey locusts, which killed the coverage
Right.
over the St. Augustine. And at that point, you can turn it into a rice paddy in your St. Augustine, still going to die.
Yeah.
And then we had the drought and the water restriction. So
2011 changed the landscape
Right.
out here immensely.
well, and we just did what we could. Some of my St. Augustine survived under the tree. My neighbors across the street, wonderful people, they have some kind of hybrid, some
Some of those
college.
Bermuda tiff or something.
Yeah,
like
something like that you seed it out and you put a squirt of water on it every once in a while. It does fine. Well, they let me take their clippings
that.
and we spread it out, so we got some coverage in there. In fact, I just did it again, and we finally, after hearing you talk, we said, "To hell with this. We're going to Xeriscape." Now we wound up getting sick and all that kind of stuff, and we're just dealing with what we got. And a friend of mine was a landscape designer here in Midland. He's moved off. But where do you get started with that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my way that I got started is a little bit different, I guess, than most folks. My family moved here in '44. My dad was a geologist, a paleontologist, and both sides of the family had lived somewhat of a farm existence. In fact, my dad was raised on the back of a horse, on ranches both in Oklahoma and up in Canada. So when they moved here, they wanted to live out in the country. And
Can you pull your mic just a little closer, Burr? Thanks.
They moved out to the corner of what is now Midkiff and Neely, but at that time, it was about 2 miles out of town. The closest building was San Jacinto, so that shows you how far away that was. But instead of trying to make it a typical landscape with lawns and the trees that were common at the time, which were Siberian elm actually back then, they decided, since they loved to go out and camp, they would find things and dig them up and bring them back. And my mom was sort of the pioneer ornithologist for West Texas, so my folks would always be out in the field almost every weekend. And every time they saw something they liked, they'd dig it up and bring it home. So I grew up with creosote bush and Texas sage and all these different plants, evergreen sumac, all these plants that are great native plants that you don't even need to water, growing around my house. Now, I went off after I got out of high school and wandered around for about 7 years, and I finally came back here and got a job at Wolf Nursery. And they figured out that I knew something about plants, and they hired me to be the assistant manager. And, I was doing pretty good, but then I started noticing about everything we sold was coming back sooner or later because it either died of drought or because it died because it wasn't adapted, it got some sort of disease, and that sort of made me, why not sell native plants? And I found out there was a fella down in Kerrville by the name of Carol Abbott who was the speechwriter for LBJ and had retired, and he had started a native plant nursery. And so I got together with him, and we started the Native Plant Society of Texas the same year because there was starting to get a little bit of interest going on that people really loved, if nothing else, all the wildflowers. Ladybird planted billions and billions of bluebonnet seeds all over Texas. That was one of her claims to fame, and so Carol had been sort of led to the idea of selling seeds and wildflower seeds and that sort of thing, and had started a newspaper column and then a newsletter and did radio and all that. And he was starting to get some folks getting interested, and started the Native Plant Society, and that's when I started my nursery. And it's sort of an interesting thing. The very first thing that I had was Salvia gregae, which is a little subshrub. Biggest I've seen is probably waist tall, but it's something you probably best to cut it down to the ground. And I found out it was really easy to propagate. All you have to do is take cuttings and stick them in vermiculite and perlite and wait a couple of weeks, and they got roots, and you stick them in soil and they grow. And so that was the first thing that I mass produced, and I took all the plants that I'd grown out to the trail I'd built in Hogan Park and advertised in the newspaper, and even got a little bit of TV coverage and all that. And I sold something like 450 pots of that plant in one day. And I went, holy mackerel, I think I found something here. And by then we'd moved south of town, and I built myself an underground greenhouse, built myself a big shade structure, and went to town and started selling that way. So that's how I got into it, but I've never felt like it really took off as well as it could until 2011. And when everybody in town could not water anything for over a month, and things were dying left and right, that was when people went, that makes sense. You know, I live over off of A Street, and I've got a number of plants I've planted that I've never ever watered. And people are going, you've never ever watered? And it's not even all natives. For example, Chinese pistache, a tree that you see all over town nowadays, partly because the birds plant it here and there. Afghan pine is another non-native that doesn't need moisture. But there is so many plants that are native to the Davis Mountains, to the hill country, to the Guadalupe Mountains, to Caprock Canyons, that you find them, you learn how to propagate them, and you start selling them. And the industry has not really still grown as much as I had hoped that it would when it started 40 years ago. There is a couple of real big wholesale nurseries out in Arizona that supply folks, and there's now 2 pretty good wholesale nurseries in Texas that are doing a much better job of disseminating the plants. But still, 70% of the people, when they buy a plant, they go to one of the big box stores and they get the same old blah that is grown in California, where, you know, it has got a nice humidity, it rains a lot, it's not anything like our conditions here. And that's one of the things about here that makes it sort of tough. We can have minus 10 degrees and plus 110 degrees. We can have a rainy year with 30 to 40 inches, and then we can have things like this year or 2011 where there's nothing at all. And, you know, this so far has actually been a little bit worse than 2011. But since we had water in our lakes, we were able to water our gardens, our trees, our lawns, and all that sort of thing. So we've gotten off lightly. But what happened in 2011 had been such a long drought. It started in 2007 or so. Spence was down to 3%. Ivy was down to 20%. Lake Thomas was dry basically for years. And so we just couldn't get that water. But then, who was it, Morales, that helped get the pipeline built from out there near jail? Because the city owned a ranch out there that's now the water field that they supply.
Yeah, I remember that. I can't remember who was a part of it. I remember the pipeline going in. I knew a guy that was working on that crew that did it.
It's real interesting to see that sort of thing, the use of water, and how once we got the technology to do it, we thought, man, we'll just suck it out of the ground. But Texas Tech has got a paper out that says that most of the Ogallala aquifer, which is from North Midland County all the way to Kansas, Nebraska, there's vast parts of that where there's might be only 25 years worth of water left at the rate of irrigation that's going on right now. And the one thing is those big old huge pivot systems. You fly over that country and it's green circles, green circles, green circles forever. And so much of that is cattle feed. You see all the big feedlots in that same region that are getting the cattle feed just from what's grown with all that water. It was cheap, it was simple, but now To get that water, you instead of getting the water at 100 feet, you got to have a pump that pulls it up from 400 feet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at one time, well, Terlingwa's new one was like 700 feet of stainless steel line. and my buddy's house was up where they had all the municipal tanks.
Yeah.
And when I say municipal tanks in Terlingua, it's just, like big water tank. And then here, when that was going on, it kind of frustrated me when I was a patrolman, 2000 to 2005, I guess. The people in South Midland County around the Cotton Flat store in that area, they went dry. Like, they couldn't do it. And it started getting worse. Like I said, we just kind of dealt with it. We embraced the suck, and we watered what grew and mowed the rest. And then there was a boom in water wells over here.
Yeah.
The price was phenomenal, and everybody was punching a hole.
And
so
of course, that made the water disappear.
And that made it worse. It just it infuriated me. I used to run around here. My wife and I had a game where we would walk and see who could spot the fake rocks, the plastic rock people put over their wells.
Right.
And then I forget who it was. Somebody knew what they were talking about. They were explaining how some grasses, because of the salt and the different minerals in our water, you have to apply stuff to counter it, and that, which is why you'll get rain, your grass grows really fast, but you'll pump 10 times as much municipal water and it doesn't grow. We're starting to pick up viewers, guys. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. If you got a question for Burr, just throw it in the comments. Mount Weatherford, thanks. He said they had a hard time hearing Burr. Let me know if it's better. Anything like that, just throw it in the comments and I'll get it. And if anybody has a question, fire it off and we'll be glad to talk about it. The one I wanted to ask you,
real
go,
quick.
Mike.
You were talking about having to add things into like the soil and different things. I just watched a documentary series about living during the Edwardian era, and in it they had these 2 archaeologists and 1 historian actually live a year during, like they would have during that time.
Right.
And one of the things that they had to do was they went out and they had to grow their own crops and they had to plow a field. So they grew potatoes, but one of the things they had to do was to put lime out on all the ground because I think it was too acidic.
Right.
And so you were mentioning that, and I was like, I have a reference point to that, so that kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah,
Well, it does.
and we're the opposite of them. Our soils are way too alkaline, and that causes things like iron chlorosis on so many plants that need a high volume of water and humidity. See, that's another thing that people don't realize is our extremely low humidity. Things with big leaves just usually don't do all that well here because, if you are a plant that comes from where it rains 40 inches a year and it's 85% humidity, I mean, think of New Orleans or Houston. Think of, you don't get that here. Even when it's 100 degrees, if you've got a little bit of shade and you got a breeze, you're cool, even if it's over 100. But that's not the case in Dallas.
Yeah, we don't have the kudzu that grows an inch every 8 to 10 hours.
Right.
It's funny you say that too because I went to Las Vegas one year for a friend's wedding, and I think the highest I got out there, and that was, that's a different heat. That's just that dry heat, but it got up to that 114, I think.
Right.
And then once we got back into town, walked outside, and I was like, oh man, it feels really nice and everything out here. And I was like, well, what's the temperature? And I look at it, and it's still 102, 103. But it's just a completely different type of weather. So
I got sent to a search and rescue school when I was in the Civil Air Patrol that was in Conroe at the municipal airport. It was supported by some kind of Army unit. I can't remember. Really big deal. We slept in the big GP tents, and we were out running around doing all kinds of stuff.
Slept is the operative word. You sweltered.
Oh, man. Well, yeah, first of all, you didn't sleep because of the bugs. You had to coat up in that horrible, whatever you had. It turned out the military stuff, the old, I think it was the stuff with like a really high level of DEET.
Yeah.
And it's such a high level, if you put it on your lips, it'll go numb. Like Ambisol or something like that. It was kind of, it would burn. That was the first little reality dose. It was the first time I ever actually felt or went into dehydration
Mm-hmm.
because something was going on. We were using aircraft and they got delayed or whatever, so we basically had
to stand out there.
yeah, we had a day to sort of hang out, and there was shade in the tent. Of course, you can roll the sides up, and I went in and took a nap, and it was beautiful and quiet. And I woke up and I started getting queasy and dizzy, and I noticed I wasn't sweating, and I had just run out. There was a vine there. We were running through this jungle out there, and it would grow up. It would grow up the tree, and then it would continue growing until the crap is hanging down at face level, and it had thorns on it like a rose.
Right.
But it was poisonous, so you'd get a cut, and then it would infect. It would get like the pus and everything, sort of like a bee sting around it. That's when I learned that fire ants float in clusters when it rains, because it rained a whole bunch. Of course, those tents leak, and my buddy James Baggs, now Dr. James Baggs, who'll probably see this, we pushed our cots together, took our ponchos out, and made a tent inside of the tent to keep the rain off of us. And I don't know, I got up to do whatever to go to the bathroom, and there was a cluster of fire ants,
floating by.
There was 2 or 3 inches of water in the tent. And the reason what reminded me of it, I got home to Midland, and I was completely exhausted, and I fell asleep, and I woke up, and I was single, apartment by myself. There was no food, and I was hungry, so let's go get some groceries. Got up and didn't even look at the clock. Just walked outside, and I'm like, oh man, this is awesome, because I thought I had slept and gotten up like at dawn, and it was pre cell phone days, and it was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
And 100 degrees.
Yeah, I thought that's an awful short shadow for hours. And it was just the difference, I was just home.
Yeah.
And then when I was in the Coast Guard, like a drill week or a 2-week stint, even though I could run a really good time, like I was running 5Ks and 10Ks, as soon as I got to Midland, or as soon as I got to Corpus, it was like having bronchitis with all that moisture. I mean, you're just hacking. So it would take me about a week or so to train. They did this on purpose. They gave us about a week or so, even more, to
get acclimated.
To acclimate before we took the PT test. Then when I go back, I can't run because there's so much less oxygen.
Right.
There's a difference.
Right.
And that was a place where a buddy and I were running along the coastline on the base, and there the mosquitoes were big enough. Oh, and there was always a wind. They were big enough to fight the wind and catch you. And you'd be running with these big mosquitoes just hanging on you.
It's just like that movie.
Yeah, it was like that horrible movie we talked about. So, Burr, I picked up a couple of questions.
Okay.
Actually, first, I'd like to go, one of the posts you were talking about was people were asking about the mud dauber wasp. And everybody's, you see a wasp, they just want to kill it.
Right.
But that's a totally different creature. Up where our observatory is, we're in a constant battle with
The paper wasp.
the paper wasp. Yeah, and that's the ones yellow and black, but not as yellow.
And have the nest that's
Right.
made out of paper and hangs up
Yeah.
high. Yeah.
They got the big ones and the small ones, and they
Yeah.
can be super aggressive. And then you have the mud daubers that are essentially harmless, right?
Basically, yeah. And they do a wonderful job of killing spiders. In fact, there's one species of mud dauber that specializes in black widows.
Oh, wow. That's what we need.
And what you need to do is sometimes find one of those old ones, old mud dauber nest in the winter, and break it open, and sometimes you can find out what spiders didn't get eaten, and you'll learn what's in your neighborhood. It's one of the ways that you can survey what's living in the area is just by taking the sample from the wasp doing the sampling.
That's a good idea. I never thought of
I
that.
never thought of doing that. Yeah.
I built one of those little teardrop campers off the 1954, 56 Benroy design, and I had it in my garage. And when I started, a mud dauber started a nest on on the shelf right next to where I was working, and he was going probably to my neighbor's yard and coming back with mud, and we would literally meet each other head on and move. And he
Pardon
bumped
me,
into
sir.
and it's just like, hey, we got our own thing going. I didn't bother him, and he built a big nest, and that would be a good place for it because of all the spiders and that thing. But it's kind of like the snake thing. I really haven't spent so much time outside. I really hate the whole idea of the only good snake is a dead snake.
Right.
It's that way for bugs and all that.
And that's something that's, to my mind, has been created basically by commercials, by our modern day television based society. We were taught to fear so many things back when 90% of the country lived on small farms and that sort of thing. Back as late as the 30s, you knew what would hurt you and what wouldn't, and so you didn't have this incredible fear. Like you say, to so many people nowadays, any snake is a rattlesnake. And the deal is like, for example, down in my place south of town, I lived out there over 30 years. I found, I think, 11 species of snake, but I never saw one rattler. 17 acres of land with another 50 to 70 acres surrounding it that was also mesquite pasture, so there was plenty good habitat for rattlesnakes, but we didn't have them. They are a lot fewer and further between, and they like to be in very specific habitats, and one of them, unfortunately, is where us humans like to pile up stuff.
That's true. Yeah. We had, when I worked at that airport at Eagle's Nest, they had tie downs to tie the airplanes to keep them from blowing away. And the tie downs were just those like trailer anchors. They're the augers. They're screwed into the ground, but we'd put a tire out.
Right.
And there's something magic about a tire in the middle of a field. Every damn one of them have a snake.
Yep.
And it'd be dead of winter, and we would still kick that tire around just to make sure we saw a lot of that.
Well, I love to turn over things. In fact, herpetologists, they carry around snake sticks and long sticks with hooks on it to turn over not only any sort of detritus laying on the ground, but any log, any rock, or anything like that, because so often you can find something pretty darn cool underneath something. And one of my favorite things is out at Sibley one time, turned over a bale of hay, and I found 5 of the little black-headed snakes, the little tiny guys that eat spiders and scorpions and things like that.
They're kind of dark head and then they're pink, sort of.
Yeah.
So I know everybody calls every snake a garden snake. My wife could tell you. She worked for animal control, has absolutely no fear of reptiles. And it looked like an earthworm.
Little blind snake.
He went around my pinky twice. And I know she's on a conference call in the next room. I'm going to sit here and ramble and never remember the name. But
well, there's the blind snake, which looks like an earthworm and has only black dots basically for eyes. It doesn't really doesn't really develop an image. And another thing that's sort of cool about the little blind snake is its tail is sort of sharp and pointed. It's a little bit more blunter and tougher than the rest of its body, and it's used as something that sort of can help give it purchase as it tries to dig. But an interesting thing about little blind snakes is sometimes they will be living with the big harvester ants. What so many people that don't know fire ants call fire ants aren't. The big, huge red ants and black ants are called harvesters, and they like to every so often pack up and move their nest from one place to another, and other species of ants do the same thing. And so this little blind snake will live in those ant nests, and it will eat the diseased babies or eggs that don't hatch, and so it performs this role inside the ant nest. And so when the ant population moves to another nest, here comes the little snake with it. And a friend of mine told me one time, found something like that happen at 2 a.m, a type of army ant called Nova Mesor, I think it is, down in the hill country. and found something like 4 or 5 of the little blind snakes in one column of these other snakes. I mean, of the ants. And birds have noticed that happens as well.
Mm-hmm.
And a screech owl is a small owl about the size of our burrowing owl that lives in the ground around here, but a screech owl likes to live in holes in trees. And there's a couple different species of them, but in to our east or southeast, those little screech owls will go and find one of those ant caravans, find the little blind snakes, pick them up very gently, and carry them to their nest, and drop them in their nest, so the baby owls don't have nits and lice. They are using that snake as a tool.
I was just reading about that the other day, actually, and I was going to mention that if you hadn't. But that's pretty cool.
That's one thing that's so cool about nature is there is always going to be another layer to the story. There's always going to be yet another connection, and so often our mindset has always been, it's that, so therefore it doesn't have any connection to anything else. But if you start watching everything in nature, wow, it's the connections are endless. That affects that affects that affects that, and with the 15th thing affects you again.
Yeah, it's crazy how I sent you the link and you'd read his book. It talks about the coyotes. Dan.
Yeah. Oh heck! Right now I'm blanking out on his last name. He used to teach at Tech, and now he lives in Santa Fe. He taught up in Montana for a number of years.
He was on Joe Rogan. Is where I found him. It'll come to me. Flores. Dan Flores.
Yeah, Flores.
Yeah,
Dan Flores.
And he explains in his book, and he had a lot of time to talk about it on the podcast that he did, that all human efforts to eradicate the coyote essentially made them stronger. They would move around, they would change habits, and nothing worked.
There's many million more coyotes now than there ever was before, and part of the reasons we got rid of their major competitor, not predator but competitor, being the wolf. And once we got rid of the wolves, that meant here's this huge gap that needed to be filled. And so instead of only being found here on the plains and in the Southwest as coyotes originally were, they were able to adapt and move into the humid forest of the East, and now they're seen all the way to Maine and Newfoundland, and they've completely covered the whole country, and they're even moving up further into Alaska or into Canada.
That's amazing, and they come and go. I've noticed it out at the observatory in Blackwell. There's absolutely no pattern to what they do. Every evening you'll hear them right about sunset. You'll hear them start screeching, but it's never in the same place. And I don't know. It's just hard to explain. They do things you wouldn't expect. I had killed a deer 2 or 3 seasons ago, and just happened to leave the entrails where the game camera could see it. And feral hogs had visited. I think the most damage was done by crows, and buzzards stopped by. And it's funny, there was a series of these birds, different birds feeding, and off in the distance was a coyote just sitting and looking, and every frame he got closer until he visited, and you can see him sniffing around these guys. He didn't stay very long. I think my camera interval was like 2 or 3 minutes, and they were gone. And I still have seen them in town or near town, but I haven't ever heard them.
You probably remember Chris Cherry. He was with.
Oh yeah.
He told me one time he was downtown about 3 in the morning, and he said it was a scene out of a Western. 4 coyotes walking down Wall Street at 3 in the morning, just abreast, just cruising.
We had to close the evening shift patrol. We had to go close Fairview Cemetery, and we would drive through because there are people out there all hours, and we would drive through and kind of run everybody out. And I got to where I had I'd bring a game call and call these foxes up. There was a family out there. I mean, you would see mom, dad, and the kids, quite a while, and you could see them. You just kind of get a feel for their behavior, and they were typically hanging out in one spot. They didn't range out much. I guess their territory's smaller than usual. That's
another thing that's real fascinating about critters in general. There is really a community everywhere. There's going to be the foxes, there's going to be the rabbits, there's going to be the birds, and everybody will know each other. And it's the predators sort of have to learn, okay, who's the weak one, who's the old one, who's the one that got injured. And so often the predator is just helping keep the rest of everybody else much more healthy. I mean, that's the one thing that we humans have done. We don't winnow out our population like everything else does. We try to keep everybody alive. And that's sort of a tough lesson that I think we're having to relearn right now to a small degree. Carrying capacity for animals, including humans, is a pretty real thing. You can only have so much of a population for until you run out of food. And so plants or animals continually go on these cycles of, okay, there's a whole bunch of food handy now, the population goes up. But then there gets to be too much of the predator and the prey goes down. And so there's these cycles over and over and over among every predatory animal. The population's all based on what's available, and it's not always the same. It is changed by climate. It's changed by, well, I guess mostly it's by climate. It's how much rain, how much drought. It's like when we have rain around here, for the next month, you're going to find all sorts of bugs and mice having babies and things like that. But in a drought like right now, there's probably hardly anything producing babies except what can live where we're watering. So the fact that you're seeing more mice and scat around here is because everybody waters. If they wouldn't water, there wouldn't be some.
Well, it's like we have like 3 neighbors, 3 houses with a lot of feral cats or just roaming domestic cats, and I've heard of a conversation where they're all housing over like a dozen cats, and some roam, some don't, but they're not hungry, so they're really not
hunting.
They're really not hunting the foxes, and of course everybody leaves out dog food and stuff like that. And there's all. You got a question, Mike?
No, I was. You were talking about with the animals and everything. A friend of mine at work was telling me about this study that they did with rats, and I'm gonna butcher this entire thing, so just bear with me on this. Yeah,
just roll with it.
But I think what they did is that they got a group of rats and they put them in a cage and they just let them just kind of, live and just see how everything progressed, and it got to the point where once the population reached a certain size, they would start eating the weaker young, and then they would just stop reproducing, mating entirely, just so that they could control that population and keep it to where it was a manageable size for it. So
there's been a number of studies, not only with rats but other things, where you give all the food they want, but eventually something's going to happen, and the numbers are going to get controlled.
That involved, I remember seeing something about that. I think there's a YouTube channel that has it, and it's a fairly famous psychologist or somebody that was involved in that, and and this one had the video, and it's horrible. I mean, rats get really creepy in a situation like that. So yeah, I could definitely see that, and I've seen it in you go through an old barn or hoarder houses and stuff like that. You start seeing they get to a point where there's dog food and leaky plumbing, but they just seem to get to a point where you start seeing a lot of dead ones. When we would go in these houses, and you kind of see the whole cycle's gone through. Is this Mississippi kite season?
Mississippi kites are just now gathering to leave. In fact, somebody
Okay.
reported in the last week they saw, I think, 7 or 8 circling together, and that happens usually in late August. And not only our local Mississippi kites, but also the ones from further north. But an interesting thing about the Mississippi kites is they did not live here until the early 60s. And their major food source are cicadas, what everybody calls locusts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the locusts they came here to eat aren't native either. They came with the Siberian elms in the 20s and 30s because the elms were grown back east and hauled out here on trains, and in the root balls were the cicada larvae, and so the cicadas started growing here. So here's unattended effects, whatever the right word is on that. You transport something, and something else is going to come with it, whether you think of it or not. And on the cicadas, not only did the Mississippi kites come, but then the cicada wasp came in 1980. And that's why you can go stand outside and hear somebody talking. When I was a little kid, you stood underneath the Siberian elm.
Yeah.
You had to yell.
Mm.
There was so many of them. But once that wasp got here, that took care of that population.
I didn't know that's what it was. What we had, my wife and I had that conversation the other day, and they look different. The locusts that we call them cicadas that I'm probably gonna go to hell for the number of them we nail with BB guns.
They were great fun to shoot to feed to the turtles.
I know I'm probably repeating myself over and over, but my mother got me a BB gun. It was they called it the Daisy Spitting Image. It's a lever action 30-30 styled, really accurate.
I think I had one too.
And my mom, I ran out of BBs and she took me to Gibson's, and we go up to the counter, and there's this kid back there, and he goes, BBs to shoot locusts. And we go, yep. And that's when they came in the carton. In fact, funny side story, I'm going to totally lose my place. I read the book about Carlos Hathcock, Sergeant Carlos Hathcock, Marine Corps sniper, Vietnam, very, very famous, very brave, very everything. Mm-hmm. And I was with a group of a bunch of cops as a party, and my wife was with me. I think it's before she was my wife, may have been. And we were talking about him. Several of us had read the book, and one of the ways that he got so good was that at a young age, he and some friends pulled together their money and bought a single-shot 22. Mm-hmm. And so it was 3 of them. And these are dirt poor, like barefoot Appalachian kids. And they would go hunting after school, and you took your shot at a squirrel, and hit or miss, it goes to the next guy. Right. And they were eating the damn squirrels. So he would bring home more food by getting really good. Right. And my wife said, well, how about you? What was your deal? I said, we shot grasshoppers in a cotton field. So for my birthday, she made me a plaque with a giant like stuffed grasshopper on it, and all these other bugs, because that's how I got to be on the SWAT team and all that.
That's over in that office over there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that the story behind that?
Yeah, that's the story. You didn't know it?
I didn't know the story of that. Yeah.
She even wrote like a kind of a parody of how it came to be this great precision rifleman and all that. And I still shoot BB guns, and especially now that ammunition's extinct, it's a lot of fun. I'm gonna lose my place. Cicadas and the wasp, and
so speaking of hunting, to feed something, like I said, we hunted cicadas to feed the turtles. But a friend of mine decided to be a bird rehabilitator at age 13 and found a hurt hawk. And so when I was that age, he and I would go up north of town, which is where what's the loop is. That's
about pulling a little bit closer on your mic, Burr. And you can pull it back to where you're sitting too.
We'd go up to where the loop is now, and we would take our pellet guns and we shot lizards to feed the hawk. That's a
oh yeah.
And when you see a race runner, one of those little whiptails that run 40 miles an hour, you've got to you've got to get lucky sometimes,
Yeah.
or be real patient. But that's another thing about hunting. You were mentioning when you're hunting, you like to sit and wait and watch, and that is a very good thing for the mind to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think anybody that spends time hunting has a step up above somebody that doesn't, because they've learned to observe and not get in a hurry. Our society nowadays, got to do it now, got to do it now. We've got to have immediate gratification always. But when you're a hunter, that deer's going to get here in about 30 minutes. I'll just wait.
Yeah, there was a friend of mine that hunted. He loved it, and he invited me out to his lease because they only hunted like big trophy deer, and in fact, he didn't even shoot does. But his thing was to find the certain one, the male that's passed on its
Right.
genes, and it's ready to go. He's right there where his antlers aren't going to get any bigger, and the meat's decent. And I sat there with that guy, and he could tell the deer apart, and they would cross a pipeline clearing, and this deer stopped and kind of looked and kept going, and he said, "There's going to be another one behind her." Just all the little things that he noticed, and I got to see that. And deer are highly predictable, at least in places where the food is a little more sparse. Hogs are very evasive. They're very unpredictable.
Mhm.
They're tough to hunt. Now, you can go to places in central Texas where you can set a watch. In fact, guys are making have you heard of a pig pipe?
Mhm.
Where they take PVC, drill holes, and anchor it down, and the hogs push it around to knock out the corn.
Right.
These dudes started putting cowbells on the end of them, and so other sounders would hear the cowbell, and they would come down there because they know there was food in it. So the guy got to where it was time for some more bacon. He'd sit in his blind and ring that cowbell, and they'd all start running toward it, and he'd pop them. So, I remember where I was going before I took off. The cicadas now are black. The ones that I hunted when I was a kid, they had a lot more orange to them.
Well, there's been, I think, 3 species that have come out here. Originally, the big ones were sort of a brown with black markings, and those are the dog day cicadas. Probably 20 years ago, we started getting a somewhat slightly smaller version that is green, and that seems to have showed up, but not really taken a hold of, and the population's never really developed. But if you go out in the pastures, there's 2 more species, but both of those are tiny, little tiny cicadas.
Yeah, I've seen them barely. Yeah,
maybe
the size of a peanut, maybe.
Maybe the joint of my finger. Maybe that's about it. And those, their population really hasn't seemed to have changed that much. They're too small for the cicadas or for the Mississippi kites or the cicada wasp to hunt. In fact, I'm not even sure which predator really does the most damage on either the mesquite cicada or the soapberry cicada.
I couldn't tell you. I just noticed a few of those popping up, and the little green ones you'd only see, like you said, in the pastures.
Well,
We wouldn't see them in town as much.
The green ones.
The tiny green ones.
Oh, the tiny green ones. Yeah, those are only out in the pastures. But the mid-size ones seem to like some of the more lusher neighborhoods, sort of like around Bowie Elementary, places like that. I think that's one place they were found here. And over in Odessa, there was another neighborhood that sort of became known for them, but they didn't seem to spread beyond that.
Yeah.
It's to continue that same sort of theme of increase of a species. Think of the squirrels.
Oh Lord, yeah.
No squirrels here at all until we started digging up oak trees in central Texas and bringing them out here on flatbed trucks.
Yeah. Now we got tree rats everywhere, and there are people bringing them in because they like to watch them too. I heard an old Midland story about that.
Well, I know a fellow over by Grayford Park that when they started coming in, he'd been raised in East Texas and knew that they'd end up doing damage to the houses,
Yeah.
things like that. So he started shooting them with a pellet gun, I think it was. And I think he said he killed 183 over a 2 or 3 year period. He said that as soon as you'd kill one, here'd come another.
Yeah.
But somebody else, I want to say less than 4 or 5 years ago, said that they started seeing a lot less of the squirrels. And I don't know if there was a predator that was able to adapt to hunt them, or that they got some sort of disease. And I don't think that is something that spread all over town either. I think that may have just been a local phenomenon in a certain type of urban habitat.
Yeah, there's a rabbit disease going around again, right?
Now there's always what is it, tularemia that occurs.
Is it just cyclical kind of?
Yeah, and also every so often we get the good old bubonic plague.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that'll kill a number of critters, from prairie dogs to mice. And hantavirus is another one that goes in cycles, and sometimes you don't notice unless you're living in a situation where most folks live in town, and so they're not going to see that sort of thing happen.
Right. I don't know if anybody has any questions for Burr. I'm getting some, but I can't. It's a long story. If you post it to the video, so actually click on the video, and you can see the chat there, because it's not. If you post it on a shared video, we can't see that. You have to click on the video where you have us on the big screen with the chat on the right. Because I apologize, we're missing a lot of questions due to that. I don't know if I ever told you my Mississippi Kite story. This is one of my legendary cop stories. Did I tell you?
I don't know if you have.
All right. So this was 2000, early 2000s. I was on the street. Guy called in and said a guy, he was driving down a county road, and a guy smashed his window with a rock. And this is 6 o'clock in the afternoon, about this time of year, or whenever they nest. And so I went. This dude lived on a corner, and where the truck had pulled over, and his windshield's just a giant spider. And he was talking to the guy that hit him with the rock. And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I have these really mean birds in my tree." And I was throwing rocks at him, but he threw it toward the street and hit this guy.
Oh no.
And I looked up, and they're Mississippi Kites. And I mean, I saw their daughter. I mean, she was banged up. She had cuts and all that, and they were coming in and out. And I said, let me make some calls. And so I talked to a game warden, and he said, "Look, man, it is a serious crime. You can't harm the bird. You can't destroy the eggs. You can't disturb the nest. Nothing. I mean, I'm sorry, but they're
protected.
The bird's protected. The people are screwed." And I don't know why the guy couldn't use his back door, because his house just sat in the middle of a field. But I really felt for him, because they had a legitimate. This isn't a mockingbird like pecking on your cat. I mean, these things
got talons.
Yeah, these birds were for real. And I felt bad for him, and I said, "All right, look, I'm going to be 100% honest with you, and you can't do anything about this." So, but if that bird or that nest were to get blasted with a shotgun or something, in the middle of the night, there's absolutely, unless somebody's got a security camera on, there's absolutely nothing we could do about it.
Right.
I'm just saying. Again, I would normally not advise something like that, but this guy was in a pickle.
Oh,
and I can tell you right now, what was going on, I wouldn't have even called the cops. I would have, the next day, been sewing a really cool, Apache war bonnet with feathers. I'll be totally honest.
An adjunct to that is a number of years ago, I want to say probably close to 40, Branchland Hills Country Club got in trouble because they went out and killed some Mississippi Kites, because exactly that was happening. The golfers were getting hit on the head. People were getting stitches, 15, 20 stitches at a time. And so everybody thought, "Oh, we'll take care of business." But then folks realized, no, that's against the law. But here's what you do. You find out where they're building the nest, and unless they have babies or eggs in it, you can tear down the nest.
Tear down
And
that
so
nest. Okay.
Ranch on the Hills, from then on, go out there and tear down the nest. Of course, that meant that a lot of those Mississippi kites moved over to Hogan Park, and that used to be one of the things that I would do with kids, is go out toward one of the trees where the Mississippi kites are, and they usually sort of warn you before they come out of nowhere. And so you'd get within 50, 70 feet of the tree, and all of a sudden the Mississippi kite would be hovering right over you. But because you're not real close to the tree, he's not going to.
They're just pushing you away.
But
Yeah.
man, if you get real close to the tree, you're going to get whooped.
Well, again, these poor people were getting whooped, and I told them that, and I think I was going to tell the night shift, you know, hey, if you guys get a gunshot call, and again, he was out there, he wouldn't hurt anybody else. So I talked to the guy, said, "You understand what I'm saying?" Wink, wink, and the dude was like, "Yeah." So I left, and about 30 minutes, hour later, I get another call for another broken windshield, and this time he had thrown it at the nest over his house and hit his neighbor's car behind him.
Oh no!
And I said, "This is why some species make it and some don't. It might not be a bad thing if that bird eats your kids right now, because you're sort of harming our gene pool, you know." I mean, come on. You just, oh my God. They are beautiful. And I've had them, I think it was you, we may have had a conversation that some of them are domesticated. Is it the kite or?
No.
Okay, one of them walked up to my mom
Oh wow!
one time, and she lived in Andrews. And now I wish I could remember who I spoke to. And it may not have been a kite, but it was a definitely bird like that. And people were taking eggs and raising them to have this really cool bird. And of course, like all these exotic pets, they realize they're a complete pain in the ass. But this one, they might fly around and eat some mice and get pretty big, but they know that people have the cool stuff.
In fact, that was probably a falconer. It was probably one of the several species of hawks used in falconry.
Probably, yeah.
There was a red-tailed hawk that lived west of Mississippi, west of Midland College, for I want to say at least a half a dozen years, who had been a falconer's bird that he got bored with and just let go. Now, since that hawk had already been sort of raised in town, it didn't have the same fears and that sort of thing, so it ended up living in town. And red-tailed hawks don't normally do that, nor do Harris's hawks, and that's another one that has been semi-domesticated by a falconer and has behaved completely different than 99.9% of the rest.
We've had the, what's the other one, Harris or Cooper, I can't remember.
Well, in the winter you get Coopers that hang out in people's backyards.
Okay, that would have been a Cooper, yeah.
Yeah, they nest not too far from here, but we have never found a Cooper's nest here.
I told the story. I know I've told you. I'm sure. If anybody is out there that I haven't told the story, but before we set this room up, or even when the weather's nice now, and this has ventilation, so you can smoke a cigar in here. We would sit outside in the trees, and the dove are coming in, and they're cooing, and all the little sparrows are coming in and chirping and all that. And then suddenly everybody will shut up and get as low as they can, and you just be sitting here looking. There'll be a bird this far away from you, and you'll see one of those hawks cruise over. And I guess it's the Harris, or whichever one you said.
The Coopers.
The Coopers in the backyard.
Yeah.
There, every once in a while, you'll just see one like just come screaming over your fence, and some have even hit glass doors, like screen doors.
I've got a couple of Cooper stories. One of them is I had a roadrunner sort of adopt me and my wife a number of years ago, and it would come up close to us, and we learned that we could catch a grasshopper and throw it at him, and he'd get it. And so he became real familiar with us. In fact, one time we were sitting out in the lath house, and chairs about like in here. My wife's here, I'm here, and the roadrunner's on top of the one right next to us.
Cool.
So a super nice little guy that we thought he was great. We called him Magoosh. In fact, that's my license plate. Um, but one day he was out walking along the trail in front of the house, and the Coopers comes down and strikes at him, and he sidesteps. He looks back and watches where the Cooper stop.
Wow.
And he sits there and sort of bounces around. Here comes the Cooper again. And so they're literally doing that. And you realize the Coopers probably doesn't have much of a chance to catch, but this is one of those exercises where the predator is getting trained, I guess. And so that's a weird thing that happens between two similar predators. I mean, roadrunners hunt a lot of birds as well as lizards and snakes, so they've got some similar hunting styles. But the other thing about the Coopers is we used to have this brush pile. My landscaping business, I'd have all these branches I'd bring home, and we created a brush pile probably 10 feet tall and 10 feet across, and mice and rats and stuff like that would live inside it, and we didn't mind because we had snakes and other things to eat them, so there was never an overpopulation. But the birds would love to hide in that. But the Cooper's hawk sort of learned that, in fact, we fed birds right next to that brush pile, and the Cooper's hawks learned that, okay, that's a place to come attack. And so every so often you'd see a Cooper's hawk come in, take a sparrow, he'd go sit up in the tree 15 feet away from the brush pile and start eating that bird. All the other little birds would come out and start feeding right underneath him because they knew he was busy.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. You have to spend a lot of time outside to really start to see stuff like that. It's kind of like we had the discussion about astronomers and pilots, stuff like that. We see more UFOs than anybody else because they're always looking up.
Yep.
Right. So we see the Mylar balloon at 10,000 feet that's reflecting just right, and it lands on us. We actually got one question made it through the junk. I know I'm screwing this up, but we've had a number of viewers. Most of the bass around here are the Mexican freetails, right?
Right.
Is there any other kind? Are they worth counting?
Well, there's a bat rehabilitator up in Lubbock, and she has rehabilitated 11 species.
Oh, wow.
Most of them are just coming through in migration. Most of them don't come up here on top of the Llano. Most of them are found in Paladuro Canyon and places like that where there's a lot more rock crevices and caves and that sort of thing. So anything that's going to be found here is either going to have adapted to living in a human structure, like the Mexican free-tailed, or something just passing through. A number of years ago, somebody reported being out on the Sibley Trail and seeing about 300 bats come into the water tank, big water tank next to the windmill. Back when there's a wooden windmill out there and a water tank, it was a all wooden sort of thing, and it had a lid on top that for some reason wasn't on that night, and for some reason the tank was not full of water, and so all the bats had gotten in there for the day, and so they came out at sunset when the person was walking down the trail. And I know you know the story about the bats in the courthouse.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, the dispatcher, when the sheriff's office was in the basement, had a sign that she put over the little whatever you call it, the little pass-through window that said beware of bats, and then somebody wrote cats, and then somebody wrote and men with large hats and all that. We had a lot of like weird passageways in that building through the back of the jail and the elevator shafts and all that, and you could smell the guano in there, and we'd see one every once in a while, which leads me to my next question. If you catch one of those, if you don't harm it, they pretty much just die, don't they? My wife would every once in a while, they would catch one when she was in animal control, and they just released them anyway, and she'd bring it home, show them to me and Aaron, just because it's cool, and we'd put them in the tree, and 2 or 3 of them were just dead on the ground.
The fact that they were able to be caught sort of tells me they were already diseased in some way.
Oh, okay.
But that is also the flip side of it, is once in a while, a long while, they'll get rabies. And if you pick up a bat on the ground, you're running a chance of doing something pretty stupid.
Yeah.
And so anytime I see a bat not hanging from a ceiling of something or from a tree, I'm going to be downright cautious. I'm not going to ever pick up one off the ground. That's to me court disaster.
Even if they looked healthy, we both wore gloves. But did they will they use a bat house? I know some places, particularly up north, people build bat houses instead of bird houses, and they're successful.
Well, I'm not sure what's the optimal size. A lot of folks have attempted to put up some of the smaller bat houses. There was, I think, one out at I-20 for a while, and it was just a couple of slats with enough space for them to go up into. And in fact, I think we had one at Sibley for a number of years too. But we never saw bats going into any of those. However, I think it was down in San Antonio, back 100 and so years ago, there was this huge structure that was built, I want to say 50 feet tall and far across, and had all these entryways and all sorts of little cubby holes. And they did that on purpose, not only for bats to control insects in the farms, but also the guano.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's such good fertilizer.
Great fertilizer, yeah.
You go out to Carlsbad and you realize that three of those caves out there were mined for guano and completely stripped of thousands of years of guano.
Yeah, there were. I read about an operation with South America, something like that. They had that sounds right. Where they would where the bats were living in these caves, they started digging like mining tunnels where they had a nice flat floor, and everything's level, so the bats would just poop all over the floor, leave at night, and they would go in.
Shoveled it up?
Yeah, with just like a front loader and scoop it all up. And then they started blocking off, like putting mesh over the old caverns, so they would use the new ones. And so they were, and I've read stories of guano ships exploding, because, it does.
And nowadays you got to go to a fancy organic gardening place and buy back guano at a high dollar.
Yeah.
No longer is it a common sort of thing. And we don't harm the bats like we did 100 years ago. Why not? Why not go back to doing that? It'd help control all of the bugs and all that, and be a lot better than spraying.
Oh yeah, we just got a question. Tim Kite, who's always on the podcast with us, said ask Burr about those maternal bat colonies we found in Sanko.
Yeah, that's a real good point that Tim brings up, is those colonies where there are baby bats, there's no males. The males are out cruising. Once they've done their deed, they leave the females, and so it's the females and the babies in the colony.
This one, again, Sanko, Texas, cool ghost town trip that we did. We went there's a motorcycle trip, and there's a church there, very kind of, mid-sized church. It's bigger than all the Baptist church on Cuthbert behind the Kent station. It's, maybe double the size of that, and, typical kind of country church. It looked like they just left. It was very, very recently abandoned, and of course you could smell it when you get in there. And I was so impressed with my new Android because it could record the squeaks.
All right.
But it was huge. I mean, there were places you go and the fumes were just, they just choke you down. Of course, it still had carpet, so stuff dried out pretty fast into the air. But yeah, I don't remember that. I'm sure. I know I hadn't seen Tim's video in a while. A minute, folks, if you'll check it out, it's in the comments. Tim just put it up again. If you want to comment, you have to go actually to this page, because I can't leave this window and see the other ones without screwing up the sound.
And speaking of Sanko, you know who that's named for?
I used to. I've forgotten all that.
Sanico. And Sanico was a Comanche chieftain who came to Fort Chadbourne, back in the 1850s, was sort of, who was it? He was a Ponateca, which was the sort of northwestern Comanche affiliation, and one of the famous things of Sanico is he came up to Fort Chadbourne and says, "I hear you all got a real good racehorse," and the captain or whatever said, "Yeah, sure do. I've got this old spabine mare over here that I bet can beat your horse, your fancy running horse." And so they got bets and things like that. The Comanches put down 500 buffalo robes and, really bet it up strong. And they started that horse race, and it was a mile out and a mile back. And the last quarter mile, the little Indian on the back of the spavine mare was riding backwards, waving at the horse behind him.
That's cool. That was it. The trip we made out there was pretty interesting. The history of the towns and a lot of you can just walk up to. Speaking of snake farms,
that's some real interesting country around there, and too bad it's a good hunk of it now is high fenced and got exotic game and things like that on it. That area used to have. That's the only place I've seen a mountain lion in real life. I've seen the tracks of mountain lions and seen blood running from a deer that I knew a mountain lion was not far away, but that was the only one I actually saw go. Was in that neighborhood, Blackwell up to Maryneal, that little back road.
Oh yeah.
That's a wonderful little road. And then when you leave Fort Chadbourne and you go over to, what is it, Haystack, and then down to Robert Lee on dirt roads.
Yeah,
that's another real cool little road. But like I say, there's that big fenced-in area now that it's changing what lives there, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That whole area, there was an old railroad out there. In fact, if you have to have a small boat or a kayak. If you put in at Oak Creek, that's where we sail a lot. We can't with a sailboat with a mast, we can't get under the bridge, and it's such a pain in the ass to collapse it. We've gone in canoes and kayaks. You first cross an old road bridge. That was a highway that accompanied the side of the railroad, and then you go further down, and there's a railroad bridge that is, I think, now a pipeline bridge, that it connects a pipeline. Now you won't see the road unless it's down really low, and it's low enough. We had lunch on it. We had to, and still had to, like, it was so high we had to lift the dog out of the canoe. And yeah, people would get out there and tie off and just get in the water.
When's the last time you've been to Oak Creek?
Let's see, 4th of July.
Oh, did that one bald eagle nest survive? They had a nest over there probably 4 or 5 years ago, and a number of folks were getting pretty excited about it, but it seems like maybe I heard the tree that it was in blew down or something.
I haven't heard. I've heard a little bit about that, and every time I think, I forget to ask anybody, but I haven't heard anything about it. And we talked to a lot of locals down there. Next time I go, I need to go to the hardware store, Jerry's Hardware on the corner, because if that tree fell, he would have gotten a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. Everybody knows that old guy, and he knows everybody else. And it's a funny coincidence. I may have told you, we talked about it on the podcast. Right across from Jerry's, at the intersection in Blackwell. That's all it is. So he'll be on the northwest corner. Husband and wife. There was an old law enforcement target in there, like one of the old bullseye targets, the FBI targets they used, which coincidentally they're starting to use again. But I got chatting with him, and he was an ex-cop, and he was in, I think he worked at OPD for a while. I'm going to butcher this all up, but he was in the Air Force as a security policeman stationed at the Fort Phantom Hill Nike launch facility.
Oh, wow.
Which is, and we talked about it in an episode, completely untouched since it closed down. They when they pulled the Nikes out in favor of other systems. They padlocked the gate, pitched the keys to a school system, and left it. It's a time capsule.
Do you know Linda Hannafin?
Yeah, the
Scuba diver.
yeah, we talked about her.
She's got a silo over toward Abilene that she
Num-
uses for diving.
Number 9, I think. When we did that episode, I finally figured out how to use the USGS Earth Explorer.
Yes.
I finally learned how to use Earth Explorer because it's kind of weird, and I can pull aerial photos from as far back as the 30s if they have them.
Right.
And a lot of the areas we looked at are missing during the period of time that those missiles were in use.
Mm-hmm.
So, here, or Abilene, Roswell, I can't remember, I think, had some
Pretty
Nikes and
close
some
by,
Atlas.
yeah.
So we were in the middle of them. We
Mhm.
always talked about it,
Yeah.
that we would know when a 20 kiloton aerial got popped. They were so inaccurate, they put giant, as big as they could stuff in them, nuclear
Right.
warheads to
Right.
try to stop the Russians from flying over. But I found a picture of hers and put it in that episode.
Ah.
I couldn't remember which one, but I just took pictures of ones I knew where they were, and she hadn't ever seen it and was asking where I got it.
Oh,
So
wow.
I think their doors, the doors on the top, I think they're removed. They either had to remove them or block them like with a concrete something to show on satellite imagery that they weren't operable, that they didn't work.
Right.
But it was before a lot of that was done, before it got turned over to a ranch or whatever. Gents, we're about to burn our batteries out on our camera. I was stupid and bought the other side. Brought the wrong size camera. This one doesn't run directly off of AC. It only charges off of AC. So we got to talk, and then when I get down to one bar, we got to stop, and that's where we are. So, fantastic.
Well, as always, a lot of fun.
It's a
it's
blast,
awesome.
man. We'll do it again. I had a period where I wasn't able to record, and then we had a whole bunch of stuff land on us. We got the opportunity to get Webb Wilder on, one of my favorite musicians, and then Sergei Sputnikov, that he grew up in the Soviet Union, and talked about that a lot.
That was a good episode. That was a good chat.
Yeah,
Just
Sergei's
talking
cool.
to him, so.
He sent me some information on another guy to talk to. That he's a KGB document historian.
That's cool.
One thing that you're doing here, and technology is allowing you to do it or whatever. What we're doing is porch sitting. We're sitting on a city park bench and
Mm-hmm.
spinning tails,
And
that's something that we need to do a heck of a lot more of.
I always tell the story to anybody that'll listen, but we researched the 1954 or whatever the hell it was, the fighter
Oh yeah.
that collided with the Cessna,
Yeah.
killed 7 people, and just rained parts and bodies on that area around Comanche, Thomaston and Comanche, because it was one of those things that you always heard about on the school bus, and there's just not much info. And we dug into it and looked into it, and we did a video on it in the long form conversation. And there were people complaining that they were 2 minutes into the video already, and all they're doing is talking about beer. Because they're used to it being over with in 30 seconds. We going all the way back to the 40s, we're used to very chopped up little things. And I can listen to a good long form podcast, the best thing in the world for a road trip or whatever. If you really want to learn something,
That's what I'll do. Just put on a podcast or something, just whenever I'm driving, just be able to listen to all of that.
Yeah.
But as a millennial, though,
You got it in.
yeah, I can say that if I don't get the information in the first 15 seconds, I'm pretty much out of it. So
I think everybody's
yeah.
I think everybody's getting like that, because there are people that I'll say, yeah, there's a really good like with law enforcement, political crap around here. I have some good videos where a couple of lawyers sit down and talk about a certain situation. And it's an hour conversation that you can't tie up in a Facebook meme, and you can't knock it out in a 3, 4, 5 minute video.
Yeah.
Sergey is pushing it at 12, 14 minutes, and his are done. But we should do a video of the that crash in a 10, 15 minute format.
Yeah.
I mean, so people at least know about it. But if you want to know more about the research behind it and how we did it, and that's more. But the things you do aren't that you know, and that your conversations are based around aren't 30-second things, and they always lean to really cool stories. And your brain goes off. One thing this podcast has done is it's improved my focus, which is something I need because of the nerve damage that chemo does. But I'm better at it because I have spent hours and hours listening to myself speak when I edit these, and I interrupt less, I listen more, because when you're recording it, you can't have 3 people talking at the same time.
Right.
You got to make a middle note to come back, and if you do interrupt, it's with a question, because I got to be able to follow it all the way through. Wait a minute, now were you in Alpine or were you in Odessa? Okay, let that roll. So that's been the great part. And Burr, you're one of our favorites, man. I'm sorry it took us so long to get you back in here, and we'll definitely do it again and take questions and all. I think I just figured out how to fix that. So
It sounds good to me, and this lime peel was pretty good.
Shiner was sea salt, lime, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing
First time I've had it.
I'm doing the Sam Adams summer ale. It's really good. And I had promised you a growler of Eccentric Brewings, but I couldn't make that happen because we had to change the days. Because we were going to do Shandy that one morning, and then I wasn't able to do it, and then didn't have time to grab it. Hadn't seen Tim since then. Anyway, gents, we'll punch out before our cameras do. Cheers, Burr. Thank you. Folks, thanks for watching. Enjoy it. If you're watching this on Facebook, you want to finish it later, a couple of days, I'll have a produced version on YouTube, all up and ready to go with better video. And, man, I won't have as much pale chemo white going on, at least on these cameras. This one out here, I look like a freaking ghost, even though I actually got some sun. All right. Cheers, folks. Thanks for joining us. Enjoyed. And we'll do it again.
Adios.